Back in 1979, there was no frontman quite like Ian Curtis. The slight frame, the severe side parting, the long dark overcoat that made him look less like a rock star, and more like a character out of a Dostoevsky novel. And that dancing, that extraordinary, convulsive, trance-like dancing that made audiences all over Britain stop talking and just stare, because it didn't look like performance. It looked like something happening to him rather than something he was choosing to do, and in a way that nobody watching fully understood at the time, it was. Ian Curtis was the singer of Joy Division, the most intense and atmospheric band to come out of post-punk Manchester. In just a few short years, he and his 3 bandmates created 2 albums that would go on to influence virtually every serious rock musician of the next 4 decades. Tom York, Kurt Cobain, Nick Cave, Trent Reznor. Every single one of them would point to Joy Division as foundational, but Ian Curtis never lived to see any of that. On the 18th of May, 1980, 12 hours before Joy Division were due to fly to America for their first ever North American tour, Ian Curtis was found dead in his kitchen in Macclesfield. He was 23 years old. He had a wife, a 1-year-old daughter, and a secret that had been hiding in plain sight in every song he had ever written. And today I want to tell you the full story of Ian Curtis, where he came from, what he went through, and what really happened in those final 12 hours before the flight that never took off. Ian Kevin Curtis was born on the 15th of July, 1956, in Stretford, Greater Manchester, but it was the nearby market town of Macclesfield where he grew up and where his story would begin and end. Macclesfield is not a glamorous place. It never really was. In the 1970s, it was a place of terraced houses, textile mills, and people who got up early, went to work, and didn't make a fuss. Not the most obvious breeding ground for one of the most important artists of the 20th century. But Ian Curtis was always going to be a slightly awkward fit for ordinary Macclesfield life. From a very early age, it was clear he existed at a slight remove from his surroundings. He was quiet, bookish, in a way that set him apart. He devoured literature, J.G. Ballard's science fiction, William Burroughs, Dostoevsky. He was, by all accounts, the sort of teenager who took ideas seriously in an environment where that wasn't always encouraged or particularly welcome. His mother Doris and father Kevin were respectable working-class people, and by Ian's own account, he had a fairly unremarkable upbringing by Macclesfield standards, but his interior life was anything but unremarkable. He discovered David Bowie, Lou Reed, Iggy Pop, the Velvet Underground, music that felt like literature, artists who treated their records as novels, with characters and darkness, and a sense that a 3-minute song could carry the full weight of real human experience. Ian Curtis absorbed all of it, and then, in the summer of 1975, at the age of 19, he did something that would define the rest of his short life. He married Deborah Woodruff. They had known each other since school. Deborah was smart, grounded, and genuinely loved by Ian. But there was something about the decision to marry so young, in that particular town, at that particular time, that created a tension in Ian Curtis that would never fully resolve. He was, as one friend put it, a man with an interior life too large for the container he had built around himself. They moved into a small terraced house, eventually settling at 77 Barton Street in Macclesfield. Ian got himself a job as a civil servant at an employment office, spending his days helping unemployed people find work, while his own ambitions remained, for the time being, strictly an after-hours affair. Then came the night that changed everything, the 20th of July 1976, the Lesser Free Trade Hall in Manchester. The Sex Pistols are playing one of the most famous gigs in British music history. There are roughly 50 people in the audience. Among them, scattered without knowing it, are the people who will go on to form the Buzzcocks, the Smiths, the Fall, and Joy Division. Ian Curtis is there. He's wearing a donkey jacket with the word hate written on the back, which gives you a fairly accurate picture of where his head was at. He runs into 2 lads he knows from the scene, Bernard Sumner and Peter Hook. They tell him they're trying to start a band. Ian says he wants to be their singer. They say yes, and from that moment, everything accelerates. The band starts life as Warsaw, a name taken from a David Bowie track. They are raw. They barely know how to play their instruments properly, but there is something in the rehearsal room with them that none of them can quite name. An atmosphere, a weight, a sense that what they're doing is pointing towards something. They renamed themselves Joy Division in 1978, a name taken from a novel called House of Dolls, set in a Nazi concentration camp. It was a deliberately uncomfortable name. That discomfort was part of the point. Their music was unlike anything else being made in Britain at the time. Post-punk, yes, but slower, darker, more internal. Where punk had been rage directed outward, Joy Division turned it inward. Bernard Sumner's guitar was brittle and precise. Peter Hook played bass lines that were almost melodic, more like a second lead guitar than a rhythm instrument. Stephen Morris's drums were mechanical and metronomic, and underneath all of it, or rather in front of all of it, was Ian Curtis. His voice was a deep baritone that shouldn't have belonged to a 22-year-old. He sang as if he were confessing rather than performing, and his dancing, already unusual in these early years, made audiences uneasy in the way that only genuinely felt art can. He would jerk and twitch and throw himself around the stage with an intensity that looked less like stagecraft and more like something trying to get out of him. It would be a long time before anyone understood what that something was. In 1978, Joy Division signed to Factory Records, Tony Wilson's Manchester label. Wilson was a local television presenter and music entrepreneur who had seen Joy Division perform and immediately understood that they required a different kind of attention. He signed them, reportedly, on a napkin. The contract gave the band complete artistic control and ownership of their own music. In 1978, that was almost unheard of. Producer Martin Hannett took what Joy Division were doing in the rehearsal room and stretched it into something almost otherworldly. He separated the instruments, added space and echo, made the bass sit low and heavy and the drums sound like they were coming from the bottom of a well. Joy Division hated what he did to their sound at the time. History has rather thoroughly vindicated Hannett. The result was Unknown Pleasures, released in June 1979. The cover, a rendering of radio waves from a pulsar, white lines on black, designed by Peter Saville, is one of the most reproduced images in the history of popular music. You have seen it on t-shirts in every country on earth. And you almost certainly knew it long before you knew what it was. The album sold modestly at first, but word spread the way word only spreads when something is genuinely affecting people. And Ian Curtis, quiet, ordinary Ian Curtis from Macclesfield, who worked at the employment office and went home to his wife, became almost overnight a figure of considerable fascination. Here's the thing though, while all this was happening, while the press were calling them one of the most important bands in Britain, and audiences were staring open-mouthed at this young man, convulsing on stage, something else was going on, something that Ian Curtis was trying to manage, and hide, and push through, something that would kill him. In December 1978, during the drive home from a gig in London, Ian Curtis suffered his first recognized severe epileptic seizure. He was hospitalized. On the 23rd of January 1979, he was officially diagnosed with epilepsy. The doctors were not optimistic. He was 22 years old. To understand what this meant for Ian Curtis, you have to understand what epilepsy treatment looked like in 1978. The medications available, phenobarbital, phenytoin, carbamazepine, valproate, often in combinations, often in high doses, were blunt instruments. They could reduce the frequency of seizures, but they came with a catalog of side effects that would test anyone's will to keep going. Severe mood swings, depression, a chemical dulling of personality that made the people closest to Ian feel like they were sometimes speaking to a different person. His wife Deborah would later describe watching her husband change, becoming quieter with her, more distant, more inward. Whether that was the medication, or the illness, or the pressure of Joy Division's rising profile, or all three, it's impossible to entirely separate. And then in April of 1979, their daughter Natalie was born. Because of the severity of his seizures, Ian was often afraid to hold her. He feared that a sudden episode might put her in danger. Think about that for a moment. A father who cannot safely hold his own baby daughter. His bandmates knew about the epilepsy, of course, but by their own later admission, they largely didn't know how to help. And Ian, who had a tendency to tell people what they wanted to hear when they asked if he was okay, didn't push them toward helping. He simply said he was fine and kept going. Because here is what nobody watching Joy Division perform understood. Every night on stage in front of audiences who thought Ian Curtis's convulsive trance-like dancing was one of the most astonishing artistic choices they'd ever witnessed, Ian Curtis was sometimes quite literally having a seizure. The audience didn't know. The other bands sharing the bill didn't know. And Ian Curtis, who had a flight to America, booked, and a band to keep together, and a career that was just beginning to explode, said nothing. It was in October 1979 that Ian Curtis met Anna Connor. She was Belgian, a music journalist and promoter, who had first seen Joy Division play at a venue called Plan K in Brussels, and had been struck, as so many people were, by the performance of the singer specifically. They began spending time together, first in groups, at gigs, in the orbit of the scene, then alone. Now, what exactly their relationship consisted of has been debated ever since. Ian's wife Deborah described it as a full romantic affair. Anik herself, in a rare interview she gave 30 years later, insisted it was entirely platonic, but the combination of medications Ian was taking had made a physical relationship impossible, and that what they shared was emotional and intellectual and intimate, but not sexual, she said. It was a completely pure and platonic relationship, very childish, very chaste. She also said, "Ian and I were certainly very close emotionally. I think I just came at the right time when he was in need of comfort, affection, tenderness." Whatever the precise nature of the relationship was, and with Ian Curtis gone and Anik now also gone, having passed away in 2014, we will never have a definitive answer. It was clearly the most significant emotional bond of Ian's final year of life. He wrote her long, tender, poetic letters. He described her as the one person who made him feel truly seen, and people who knew him during this period noticed the change. He became slightly loftier, more removed, operating, as Bernard Sumner put it, in a slightly different register from everyone else. At home, meanwhile, things between Ian and Deborah were deteriorating badly. Deborah had begun divorce proceedings. The house on Barton Street, where they had married young and started a family and tried to build something ordinary, was becoming a place where that ordinary life was visibly coming apart. Ian reportedly asked Bernard Sumner to make the decision for him. Should he stay with Deborah or go to Anik? Bernard Sumner refused. He said it wasn't a decision he could make for someone else. Looking back, you wonder if Ian Curtis was already running out of people to turn to. In early 1980, Joy Division were recording their second album, Closer. It is without exaggeration one of the most harrowing listening experiences in the history of recorded music. Not harrowing in the way that extreme metal is harrowing, not the discomfort of volume and aggression. Harrowing in the way that great literature is harrowing. Songs called Atrocity Exhibition, Isolation, Decades, The Eternal. Bernard Sumner would say later, and this quote has stayed with me since the first time I read it. It wasn't until after his death that we really listened to Ian's lyrics and clearly heard the inner turmoil in them. The people making this album with Ian Curtis, spending hours with him in a studio, hearing these words come out of his mouth, in that deep baritone. Did you fully understand what they were hearing? I don't say that as a criticism of them. I say it as a reflection of how completely Ian Curtis had compartmentalized his suffering, and as a reminder of how hard it is, in real life, to recognize when someone is telling you the truth through their art. During the recording sessions, Ian's condition had become so severe that he was experiencing approximately 2 major seizures per week. On one occasion, his bandmates searched for him, and Peter Hook found him unconscious on the floor of the studio toilets, having hit his head on a sink during a seizure. He was becoming very seriously ill, and the schedule kept going. April 1980, Joy Division are supporting the Stranglers at the Rainbow Theatre in Finsbury Park, a show before almost 3,000 people. Midway through the performance, despite explicit instructions given beforehand, the venue's lighting technicians switch on the strobe lights. Ian Curtis collapses almost immediately. He staggers backward, falls against Stephen Morris's drum kit, in the full throes of a photosensitive seizure, in front of 3,000 people. When he recovers, he insists on traveling to a second gig, booked for the same evening in West Hampstead. 25 minutes into that performance, his dancing begins to lose its rhythm, and he collapses again. The worst seizure he has had to date, in front of an audience who genuinely are unsure if what they are rewatching is a performance or an emergency. The 7th of April, 1980, Ian Curtis takes an overdose of his epilepsy medication at home and tells Deborah what he's done. She rushes him to hospital. His stomach is pumped. He is assessed and, almost unbelievably, discharged the following day on the condition that he'd perform a Joy Division gig that evening. The gig is cancelled anyway. Ian is too ill. A riot breaks out outside the venue. Tony Wilson finds Ian Curtis upstairs at the venue, alone, in tears. He had already tried to end his life once, and still, the American tour was being planned. The flights were being booked. America was waiting. The 2nd of May 1980, Birmingham University's High Hall, Joy Division take the stage late. The audience, students, punks, and music obsessives, who have been waiting a long time, don't know it yet, but they are about to witness the last concert Joy Division will ever play. During the set, they debut a new song called Ceremony. It will be the only time Joy Division play it live. It is also the first song New Order will release. 6 months later, a bridge between what was and what would come, though no one watching knows that yet. Toward the end of the set, after a song called Decades, Ian Curtis has to be helped off stage by the band's minder Terry Mason. He simply cannot continue. His bandmates play on without him for a moment, and then Ian Curtis returns to the stage for one final song, Digital, the very first song Joy Division ever recorded for Factory Records, back in October 1978. The last line he sings that night, in a venue that will later be demolished, in a city far from Macclesfield, before a crowd who mostly don't yet understand what they're watching, is this: Don't Ever Fade Away. 16 days later, he is dead. After Birmingham, there are 2 weeks that on the surface appear relatively calm. Stephen Morris recalled Ian after the gig, standing outside in apparently good spirits, saying something like, "Drop me off at Amigos, a Mexican restaurant," and seeming perfectly fine, upbeat even, Morris remembers thinking. He's probably meeting some friends. See you in America. And this is one of the most heartbreaking things about Ian Curtis's story. In his external, presentable self, he could still summon that person. The ordinary bloke. The dry sense of humor. The warmth. He was very good at showing people what they wanted to see. But inside, a different story was being written. He had been confiding in Lindsay Red, Tony Wilson's partner, who had offered Ian a period of rest at her home, that he believed, with his epilepsy getting worse and not better, that he could no longer continue to perform live. He saw Joy Division going on. He saw himself being left behind by the thing he had built. He felt very removed from it all. And on the evening of Saturday the 17th of May, he was alone at 77 Barton Street. Let me take you through what we know of Ian Curtis's last day. Earlier in the day, he had been meant to go water skiing with Bernard Sumner. He didn't go. At some point during the day, he was in contact with Deborah. That evening, she came to the house. He asked her, one more time, to reconsider the divorce, to not go through with it. Deborah, knowing his history, worried about his state of mind, offered to stay the night with him. Ian said no. He wanted to be alone. He made her promise not to come back before 10 o'clock the following morning, by which time he said he would already have left to catch his train to Manchester. The U.S. tours was 2 days away. There was a flight to catch. Deborah took their daughter Natalie to her parents. Then she returned to Barton Street one more time to check on Ian. His demeanor had changed. He was calm now, settled. The agitation of earlier had lifted. Deborah noticed it. He told her again, "Leave me alone tonight. Don't come back until 10. She left. In Belgium, Annick Honor was at a concert at Plant K, the very venue where she had first seen Joy Division perform. Her phone rang. It was Ian. He wanted to see her at Heathrow the following day, before the departure for America. Could she come? She said yes. She made plans to travel to London in the morning. Alone in the house on Barton Street, Ian Curtis did two things. He watched Werner Herzog's 1977 film, Stroszek. It is a film about a gentle, damaged German street musician who emigrates to America with a woman he loves and a friend, searching for a better life. In Wisconsin, everything falls apart. The film ends with a fairground sequence of extraordinary strangeness, a chicken dancing in a box, a ski lift going around in empty circles, and the musician, Bobby Stroszek, who is driven to a remote spot and shot himself. It is a film about the impossibility of escape. Ian Curtis sat alone in his kitchen and watched it, 12 hours before he was meant to board a flight to America. Then he put on Iggy Pop's The Idiot, the album that he and his bandmates had always loved, that Iggy had made with David Bowie in Berlin while both men were trying to escape their own demons in a foreign city. At some point during these hours, the exact time is not known, Ian Curtis wrote a long letter to Deborah. In it, he spoke of their life together, of his love for her, of his love for Natalie. He wrote about his troubles. He wrote that he wished he were dead, but he did not, according to those who later read it, explicitly state any clear intention. He took out photographs of Deborah and Natalie. He looked at them. And then Ian Curtis, 23 years old, with a flight to America booked for the morning, and a letter on the kitchen table, and Iggy Pop's The Idiot playing softly on the record player, hanged himself. The following morning, Annick Honor arrived at Heathrow as planned, expecting to meet Ian before the departure. He wasn't there. She called his parents' house where he had been staying. His father answered. "Ian is dead," he said, and hung up the phone. Deborah returned to Barton Street. Close to midday she had been able to bring herself to go back at exactly 10, as instructed. Something in her knew she found him. She read the letter. The news broke across the music world like a cold wave. John Peel, the BBC DJ who had championed Joy Division from the beginning, who had given them multiple radio sessions, who understood what they were doing before almost anyone else, had to announce it on his program. He played New Dawn Fades, then he played it again. Bernard Sumner would say years later that he and the rest of the band had walked past gravestones together. Once he had said to Ian, "It's bloody stupid, Ian. Imagine what it would be like to see your name on one of them. Killing yourself definitely isn't the answer." He hadn't gotten much of a response at the time. "I think all of us," Sumner said, "made the mistake of not thinking his suicide was going to happen. We completely underestimated the danger. We didn't take it seriously. That's how stupid we were." Closer, the second album, was released 2 months after Ian's death. It went to number 6 in the UK charts. The single Love Will Tear Us Apart, written, many believe, partly about the tension between Deborah and Annick, partly about Ian's own internal tearing apart, entered the UK singles chart and has never really left the cultural conversation since. The 3 surviving members of Joy Division eventually renamed themselves New Order. They went on to make some of the most important music of the 1980s. Peter Hook has said that it took him decades before he could listen to Joy Division recordings without breaking down. Annick Honor returned to Brussels. She kept her silence for 30 years, giving just one interview in 2010. She died in July 2014, aged 56. To the end, she maintained that what she and Ian had shared was real and pure and hers. Deborah Curtis published her memoir, Touching from a Distance, in 1995. It is a painful, honest, complicated account of a marriage that was also a love story, also a tragedy, and also something that defies the simple categories that mythology tends to prefer. Ian was cremated at Macclesfield Crematorium on the 23rd of May, 1980. Deborah chose the inscription for his memorial stone. It reads, Ian Curtis, the 18th of May, 80. Love will tear us apart. People still travel to Macclesfield to see it, from all over the world. The stone was actually stolen in 2008. It had to be replaced. People still go. I want to end with something that I think gets lost in the mythology of Ian Curtis. And there is a lot of mythology. The mythology tends toward the romantic, the doomed poet, too sensitive for this world, the image on 1,000 t-shirts, and I understand why that mythology exists, because art that comes from genuine suffering really does carry something within it that is difficult to name. You can hear it in his voice, in those lyrics, in the particular quality of that dancing. But Ian Curtis was not a symbol. He was a 23-year-old man from Macclesfield, who worked at an employment office, and had a mortgage, and a 1-year-old daughter he was afraid to hold. He was someone who could joke, who could say, "Drop me off at Amigos" with a grin after collapsing on stage, and make everyone around him think everything was going to be fine. He was someone who was suffering enormously, medically, personally, emotionally in ways that were not being adequately treated. He was taking up to 20 pills a day. He was mixing them with alcohol. He was touring relentlessly. He was managing a collapsing marriage and a complicated relationship across the channel. The seizures were getting worse, not better, and the band's trajectory kept moving upward and outward toward America, and he ran out of road. Bernard Sumner said something that I think is the most honest and painful summary of what happened. He said that after Ian's death, when they finally really listened to the lyrics, really heard what Ian had been writing about, it felt like something they should have understood sooner. The warning was always there. It was in every song. He just needed somebody to hear it in time. If you or someone you know is struggling with the kind of darkness that Ian Curtis struggled with, please reach out. The Samaritans are available in the UK on 116,123, any time of day or night. It's a free call. You don't have to be in crisis to use it. You just have to be struggling. Ian Curtis was 23 years old. He had so much further to go. And if this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought, and tell me who you'd like me to cover next. There are a lot of stories left to tell in this era, and I'd love to know which ones matter to you. Subscribe if you want to come along for the rest of them. I'll see you in the next one.